We'll read in a few minutes from the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 5. We want to spend one more day on Ecclesiastes before we move on to the next book that we look at in the Bible. I saw a magazine cartoon that showed a sad-looking man walking out of a bank manager's office, and the bank manager said to his secretary, "That man's got back problems, back taxes, back rent, back alimony." Some of us know what it's like to have those kind of back problems, don't we? And we'd be all wise to heed the advice of a man named Billy Earl, who several years ago said, "When your outgo exceeds your income, your upkeep will be your downfall." Our subject today is money, and if anybody could write about money and speak about it, it would be King Solomon, who was the richest man that the world had known to his day. And let's see what God used him to say in Ecclesiastes chapter 5. And if you would stand, please, if it's convenient for you. We respect God's word. Look at Ecclesiastes 5:8. He says, "If thou seest the oppression of the poor, and violent perverting of judgment, injustice in a province, marvel not at the matter. For he that is higher than the highest regardeth, and there be higher than they. Moreover, the profit of earth is for all. The king himself is served by the field. He that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loveth abundance with increase. This also is vanity. When goods increase, they are increased that eat them. And what good is there to the owners thereof, saving the beholding of them with their eyes? The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eat little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not suffer him or not allow him to sleep. There is a sore evil which I have seen under the sun, namely riches kept for the owners thereof to their hurt. But those riches perish by evil travail. And he begetteth the son, and there's nothing in his hand. As he came forth out of his mother's womb, naked shall he return as he came, and shall take nothing of his labor, which he may carry away in his hand. And this also is a sore evil, that in all points as he came, so shall he go. And what profit hath he that hath labored for the wind? All his days also he eateth in darkness, and he hath much sorrow and wrath in his sickness. Behold, that which I have seen, it is good and comely for one to eat and to drink, and enjoy the good of all of his labor that he taketh under the sun all the days of his life which God giveth him. For it is his portion, and every man also to whom God hath given riches and wealth, and hath given him power to eat thereof, to take his portion and to rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. For he shall not much remember the days of his life, because God answereth him in the joy of his heart." Thank you, and you can be seated. Today we look at wise words about wealth that are spoken to us by the wise man, Solomon. And again, Solomon knew he could speak about money because he was very familiar with it. His base salary was about $20 million a year. Besides that, he had profits from his import-export business. He had the perks of being the king of Israel, the king of Judah, the wealthiest nation in the world. He lived in a palace that took 14 years to build. He owned zoos and parks and riding stables and 40,000 horses. Every day at the palace, they served 30 oxen, 100 sheep, and different kinds of poultry and wild game. He sat on a throne that was made of carved ivory and overlaid with gold, and he and his guests drank from vessels made of pure gold. He had men servants and maid servants, and so when he talked about money and wealth, he knew what he was talking about. But you know, really, and I know some of you are thinking, good, he's going to stick it to the rich people today. Those people ought not to put it to us like they do. But you know, wealth is a relative term. To most people, a rich person, somebody's got more than they do. But to many people in the world, every one of us today would be classified as a rich person. People living in America or Europe and high income part of the Asia Pacific area hold 90% of the world's wealth. And if your if your personal assets are $61,000 or more, that means your house and your cars and your bank account and your retirement, if all those total $61,000 or more, you're in the top 10% of the richest people in the world. I remember several years ago there was a teenage girl that Debbie worked with, and she came home to her house, was visiting one day, and she went back to the end of the pantry to get something to drink, and she came back out and her eyes were big, and she said she had passed through the shelves that had food on it and got in a little mini fridge back there where we keep our soft drinks, and she said, "You people are rich." Well, I hadn't thought of it that way, but to this girl grew up not having a lot of food around, and to her we were rich because we had enough food in the house to last for several days or maybe even several weeks. So wealth is a relative term, and to most of the people in the world, every one of you, most of you anyway, would be classified as rich just in terms of dollars and cents. But let's look at some of the things that the wise man talks to us about money and wealth. He tells us, first of all, that wealth can lead to oppression. In verse 8, he talks about how the rich oppress the poor. And when we talk about wealth and riches and what rich people do and what they don't do, these are generalities, and I know they don't apply to everyone, and it's not always good to use general terms and speak of groups of people all and paint them with the same brush, but nonetheless, these are some generalities that we ought to take note of and be cautious about with our own lives and our own attitudes. He says that wealth can lead to oppression. Quite often we hear about rich people oppressing and taking advantage of the poor. Jesus talked about the golden rule that, he didn't call it that, but that's what we call it. In Matthew 7:12, he says that, therefore all things whatsoever you would that men should do to you, do you also to them. In other words, treat other people the way you want to be treated. That's what we call the golden rule. But when a man wrote several years ago, he said the golden rule is them that's got the gold make the rules. And sometimes that seems to be the case. That people who have money generally have more power, and they have the ear of more people. Many of the politicians are wealthy people. And it seems like quite often they make rules that hurt the poor people, but they exempt themselves from that. And that, I think most people would agree that's just not right, that people that make the law should have to live by them as well. We see in our time how that Hollywood celebrities, though a lot of them are uneducated, uninformed, they have a lot more political power than the average person does, the poor people do. Sometimes we have seen how wealthy people bribe the judges or they bribe officials so that they don't have to pay for their crimes like the ordinary person does. It hasn't been that long ago we read about Bernie Madoff, who was a wealthy man, but he used a Ponzi scheme to steal $64 billion from people. Some of you are older folks can remember Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, who were the TV preachers, who begged for people to send them money to help support their missions and pay for their TV program. And at one point, for several years, they were taking in $1 million a day in offerings from a lot of them from just average people who would send them money. And instead of spending it on missions, they used to pay for many mansions, private jets, air-conditioned dog houses, and even some of that went to pay off a secretary that he had sexually assaulted. Rich people taking advantage of poor people. All of us are constantly confronted with phone calls and emails from scammers who want us to give them our information so they can get into our bank accounts and steal our money. So sometimes having wealth can lead to taking advantage of other people and oppressing other people. Wealth can lead also to dissatisfaction. A lot of people think, boy, if I would just if I just had some more money, I'd be happy. But he tells us there in Ecclesiastes, if you love silver, you won't be satisfied with getting silver. If you love gold, then gold won't satisfy you either. In 1892, at age 53, John David Rockefeller was the only billionaire in the world. Somebody asked him, how much money do you need? He kept making investments, and his major investments were in the oil industry when it first was taking control in America. They asked him, how much more money do you need? And he said, just a few more dollars. He already had over $1 billion, was the richest man in the world, but he said, I just need a little bit more. You know, a few years ago, Arkansas adopted a state lottery that was supposed to make everybody rich. I don't think that's turned out quite that way. At least, it hasn't trickled down to us that I know of. And then just recently, we've passed an initiative that's going to put a casino in Polk County, even though we don't want it. And that's going to be I'm certain that's going to be a drain on our community and do a lot more harm than it does good. You got to remember, these folks who invested millions of dollars trying to get this passed, they didn't do it so they could make us rich. There are many tales of people who have won lotteries and what's happened to them, that it has led to much dissatisfaction. I read about a man named Jack Whitaker who won $314 million in the lottery. He took a lump sum payout of $170 million, but 5 years later, he wasn't satisfied. His wife had left him. His drug-addicted granddaughter had died. His daughter had cancer. He struggled with gambling and alcohol. He claims that he didn't have many friends, and that he had been involved in over 460 legal actions against him. Ironically, he was a multimillionaire before he won the lottery. He already owned a $17 million business. But even after adding the lottery winnings to it, he said, I don't have any friends. Every friend I've had has wanted to borrow money or something. And of course, once they borrow money from you, they can't be your friends anymore. He said, I'm going to only be remembered as the lunatic that won the lottery, and I'm not proud of that. I wanted to be remembered as somebody who helped a lot of people. He said, I wish I had just torn up that lottery ticket. This man had won $314 million. And he said, I wish I'd just torn it up. There was a man named Michael Carroll who was a 19-year-old garbage collector when he won almost $13 million in Great Britain's lottery. He spent his money on drugs and gambling, and he said thousands of prostitutes, only to be broke 8 years later. He said, the party's ended, it's back to reality. I don't have 2 pennies to rub together, and that's the way I like it. I find it a lot easier to live this way. 16-year-old Callie Rogers won $3 million in the United Kingdom lottery. She used her money on vacations and cars and drugs. She was broke just a couple of years later, driving a Volkswagen van to her job and as a maid, and twice she had attempted suicide. She said, before I won the lottery, when I won the lottery, I was the luckiest teenager in Britain, but today I have never felt so miserable. In 1997, a guy named Billy Bob Harrell won $31 million in the Texas lottery. His name's Billy Bob. He's got to be from Texas, right? And at first, everything was great. He bought a ranch. He bought a half dozen homes for himself and his other family members. And he and his wife and his kids all got new cars. He even made large contributions to his church. But and anybody in the congregation needed help, he was glad to help them out. But then his life began to unravel. Everybody started putting a touch on him, family and friends and people at his church and even strangers. After all, he was rich. He had won the lottery. And his spending and lending spiraled out of control. His wife left him, and 20 months after winning the Texas lottery, he committed suicide. Didn't bring satisfaction to these people. And a lot of people who think, well, if I just had more money, I would be happy, I'd be satisfied. But it doesn't always work out that way. It can, instead of making people happy, sometimes it can make them miserable. He reminds us in verse 11 that that wealth can lead to increased spending. You know, isn't that one of the laws, one of the rules? The more you have, the more you spend. He says when goods increase, they are increased and eat them up. If you're rich, you got to, to most people that means you got to keep up an image. You got to buy newer things and bigger things. And you got to throw big parties and all that kind of thing. And then you have to hire, there's higher taxes, and you got to hire accountants and money managers and financial advisors. And then when it's all over the news that people find out you're rich, and here comes the long lost relatives and people you went to high school with, all of them with their hand out. That's why Proverbs 19:4 it says that wealth makes a lot of friends. Well, not always true friends, though. People who want to be your friend. There's a guy named Abraham Shakespeare that won $31 million in the Florida lottery. Just a couple of years later, he disappeared. His body was found under a concrete slab. There was a woman who had befriended him and swindled him out of $2 million, was convicted of murdering him. Wealth can attract those kinds of people, and it can lead to increased spending. He tells us in verse 12 that wealth can also bring worry. He says the sleep of a laboring man is sweet, but the abundance of the rich will not allow him to sleep. He says, again in Proverbs 19, that every man is a friend to him who gives gifts. There is a progression. The more money you have, the more people come around, the more people. There's more worries, and less sleep. The common laboring man, he can sleep at night because he's tired. He's worked hard with his body. And again, these are generalities, but a lot of rich people, they have trouble sleeping because they're worrying about what's the stock market going to do. They're worrying about the employees, and do I need more? Do I need to cut some loose? He's worried about his investments. He's worried about the financial decisions that he's got to make. He worries about all the people who are going to try to cheat him out of his money. And so wealth can bring worries to it. I mentioned John David Rockefeller, who when he was 53 was a billionaire. But at that time, the only thing he could eat was milk and crackers. He just couldn't keep anything on his stomach. He couldn't sleep because he was worried so much. But then he decided he had enough money, he had more than needed. He started trying to give it away. He established a foundation that helped a lot of charitable causes. And when he started giving his money away, his health got better. He died at age 98 and left a huge fortune to his family on top of that. Wealth can bring problems. It can bring worry. He also tells us here that wealth can cause people to forsake God. He says in verse 13, there is a sore evil that I've seen under the sun, that is, riches kept for the owners thereof to their hurt. Every piece of money ought to have a warning written on it. You know, we've got warning on different food items and different products you buy. Every piece of money ought to say warning, this can be hazardous to your health. A lot of people think that money can solve their problems, and it can solve problems, but it can also lead to a lot of other problems. In 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 10, he says that the love of money is the root of all evil. I didn't say money is the root of all evil. He said the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some have coveted after, they have erred from the faith and have pierced themselves through with many sorrows. We probably most all of us have known people that when they were common people, that they were at church and faithful and working and all that, but then somehow or another they struck it rich, and then they didn't have time for church. They didn't have time for God anymore. In 1 Timothy 6 and 17, he says, charge them or warn them that are rich in this world, that they be not high-minded, nor trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God, who giveth them richly all things to enjoy, that they do good, that they be rich in good works, ready to distribute, and willing to communicate or willing to give. The Bible tells us that there are certain ways, certain justifiable ways, certain good ways to get money. You can get it by inheriting it. And if your family has worked hard and saved their money and invested wisely, then some of you have been able to benefit from that. You can inherit it. You can work for it. Work is an honorable thing to do. God made us to be workers. You can receive it from investments. The Bible talks a lot about investing wisely and being careful what you do with it. Or you can receive it as a gift. Probably every one of us has benefited at one time or another from somebody helping us out with a gift, with a donation when we were in a hard spot in our life, and they helped us get through it. Those are ways that the Bible justifies getting money. Not by stealing it, not by swindling somebody out of it, but by inheriting it, working for it, investing it, receiving it as a gift. The Bible also talks about being careful how you spend it. You see, the Bible teaches us that we are stewards of the money that we have. That means that it doesn't really belong to us, that what we have, it belongs to God, and He's given it to us, and we're responsible to Him. We're accountable to Him for what we do with the money that He allows us to have. We can support our church and missions. 1 Corinthians 16:2, on the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store, according as God has prospered. And the Bible teaches the principle of the first fruits, that the first thing you need to do with your money is give your tithes and offerings to God and to the church and to His work. So the Bible teaches us to be faithful to give. We use our money to support ourselves and our families. In 1 Timothy 5:8, the Bible tells us that we ought to be careful to provide for our own, especially for those in your own household. And he says, if any man will not take care of his own family, he's worse than an infidel. He's worse than an unbeliever. He's not doing what God commanded him to do. Support yourself and your family. One of the good uses for money is to leave an inheritance for your family. We would all hope and like that when we pass on, that we will leave our kids with something that will help them out with their lives and help them out paying their bills and putting them on a better financial situation. 2 Corinthians 12:14, he says that children ought not to lay up for their parents, but parents ought to lay up for their children. And we can use our money to help the needy. In Galatians 6:10, he says, therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all men, especially of them who are of the household of faith. So God gives our money not just so that we can have it and live on a high lifestyle or spend it on ourselves, but He gives it to us to take care of our own needs. That's certainly part of it. But also that we can use it to invest in His kingdom by supporting His church and by supporting missions, helping people hear the gospel so that they can be saved and so their lives can be touched, but also so that we can have some to leave to our children when we're gone. The Bible reminds us also here that wealth can be lost. In verse 14 and 15, he says, but those riches perish. And he says, as man came forth from his mother's womb, naked shall he return. He can take nothing of his labor, which he hath done. And we know that, don't we? I've never seen a checkbook or a load of cash in somebody's casket. It wouldn't do any good if you could put it there. You can't take it with you. In Proverbs 23, verse 4 and 5, he says this, labor not to be rich. Don't stress out. Don't worry about being rich, he says. He says that riches themselves take wings and they fly away as an eagle toward heaven. For most people, money's a lot harder to get than it is to lose. And what you've worked hard for many years to get can be lost very quickly and very easily. For instance, to give you a couple of more examples, there was a guy named Bud Post in 1998. He won $16 million in the Pennsylvania lottery, but he wished later it never happened. His own brother, hired a hitman to kill him and his sixth wife, and other relatives convinced him to invest in their businesses that never paid off. A landlady somehow convinced him to give him a third of what he had won, to give it to her, and he declared bankruptcy. And just a little while later, died of respiratory failure in a hospital. Easy come, easy go, they say. Well, it came easily to him, but it went away real easy as well. Wealth can be easily lost, and there's some factors, like this man, poor management can lead to it. Sometimes it's matters beyond our control, like a recession or depression, or just a bad money markets or investments that don't work out. It can be lost so easily. That's why Jesus said, don't lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust can corrupt and where thieves can break through and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not corrupt and where thieves do not break through and steal. Wealth can be easily lost. And so it's very important not to put our trust in it and not to depend on it, not to make that our God. Wealth cannot buy the most important things in life, and that's what he talks about the last few verses of this chapter. Somebody said that they define money as something that can buy you anything but happiness and take you anywhere except heaven. Money can be a good thing. Money's not either good or bad. It's not righteous or evil. It depends on how you get it and what you do with it and how you spend it. But money, somebody wrote this, money can buy medicine but not health. It can buy loyalty but not love. It can buy food but not appetite. It can buy comfort but not contentment. And the truly wealthy man is the man who has things that money can't buy. That's the person who's wealthy, who has things that money cannot buy. John Wesley said that make all you can, save all you can, and give all you can. And that's probably a pretty good philosophy about money and wealth. Make all you can by legal and legitimate and honorable means. Save all you can. There's certainly examples about saving up for later times and for older years and for hard times. In Proverbs, it talks about going and looking at the ant and how he works and stores up his food so that when times get tough and the weather gets cold, he'll have something to eat. And certainly there is a blessing to learn to give all you can. Now we, as Baptist believers, we teach in tithing that the first 10% that we make goes to God, but sometimes we give the idea that once you give God the 10%, then you do whatever you want with the rest of it. But now all of our money, all of our good gifts come from God, and we are accountable to Him. We're responsible to Him for what we do with the rest of it as well. So it's okay to want money. It's okay to get money if you get it the right way. It's okay to invest money. It's okay to spend money. It's even okay, he tells us here, to enjoy it. That's what he talks about in the latter part of it. Enjoy the things that God gives you. Enjoy the money that you have. Enjoy the things that money can buy you. It's okay to do that. But it's not okay to let it become the most important thing in the world to you. It's not okay to let money and material things become your God, so that if that's the case, you can tell that happens when the bottom line is not what does God want me to do, but how much money can I make on this? When it becomes not is this the right thing to do, or is this what will make me the most money? That's where we know when money has become too important to us. So the wise man would say to us here, be careful how you get it. There's right ways and wrong ways to get money and material possessions. Be careful how you spend it. There are reasonable means to spend it, and some that's not so wise. Be careful how you invest it. Somebody's always coming along with some get rich quick scheme today, with the internet and the access we have to it. There's always a lot of people have fallen prey to the predators on there who introduce themselves and strike up an acquaintance and want to be your friend, and then they take advantage of you and try to get your money away from you. Be careful what you do with it. But remember, no matter how much you make, you're going to leave it all behind one day. And so that's why the Bible reminds us, don't trust in uncertain riches, but trust in the living God. There's a lot of things that money can't do for you. There's a lot of things that money can't buy for you. But God can do all things. And the Bible reminds us every good gift and every perfect gift comes down from above, from the Father of lights. So regardless of what your financial situation is today, and regardless of whether you're rich or poor or somewhere in between, or regardless of where you consider yourself rich or poor, our trust ought not to be in money. Our hope ought not to be in money, but our trust and our hope needs to be in the Lord. And, Jesus said it's hard for a rich man to go to heaven, not because God doesn't like rich people, but it's just hard for a lot of rich people, he said, to let go of their trust in themselves and to recognize that they need something that money can't buy, and that is a relationship with God through faith in Jesus Christ. And that is a home in heaven that can't be bought, but it can only be received as a free gift of God through faith in Christ. So today, if you've not put your trust in Him, I pray you'd do that. Today, if you're having financial problems, I encourage you to try to look at it from God's perspective and try to make your decisions based on His Word and on His principles. And I can't guarantee you, like some preachers on TV would today, that God will make all of us rich and millionaires and all that. But I can promise you that he says that my God shall supply all of your need. Philippians 4:19, my God shall supply all your need according to His riches and glory by Christ Jesus. Sean, come lead us in our song, would you please?